pas, parce que c'est pas très. Si c'est là.
Good afternoon,
C'est là,
Change Now. How are you all doing?
Je peux pas le lire.
It's lovely to see so many people that I've met over the last couple of days having so many great conversations. This one, the next hour and 15 minutes, we've got some fantastic content for you. A brilliant panel, followed, of course, by the fireside chat that I know you're all used to, this format by now. So this session is called Reducing Biodiversity Footprint in Business. And by that, what we really mean is digging into the impact that business has on biodiversity damage and habitat reduction, and really understanding the relationship that business and industry has with the wider environment. And if we can understand that, then we can chart a way to find ways to preserve, to conserve, to improve. First off, to kick us off, to get us thinking, is somebody who has spent 10 years advising businesses on transformation, advising businesses on what they need to know about their impact, their particular business impact on the environment, on habitat, on biodiversity. So, to get us thinking, to get the juices flowing, I'm delighted to introduce from an organization that really, they really do represent our relationship with the natural world. That little badge that I know you've seen, the pandas, WWF, we've got to kick us off Benjamin de Poncheville, who is currently the head of philanthropy at WWF.
Merci. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here on that stage and representing the panda, so thank you. So why should we preserve nature? Usually when I talk about business and biodiversity, I start by reminding people why preserving biodiversity is so vital for business. Because I've noticed that while everyone is much aware about how urgent it is to preserve the climate, it's less clear when it comes to nature and biodiversity, and you've noticed that as well. I think everyone is aware of the dependence on human societies and the economy on biodiversity. The fact that all the components of human well-being are in one way or another dependent on ecosystem services. Less biodiversity, less ecosystems means major economic problems in the short to medium term. In the production of raw materials, problem with site safety and problems in supply chain and so on. So these reasons to preserve biodiversity linked to business dependence and risks are certainly the most talked about in the CSR circles today, because they're highly rational and utilitarian dimension is the one that is the most appeals to the decision makers today. So it's on the top of the economic agenda, but I noticed that we rarely see the other value of nature, its intrinsic value, the value that individuals can attach simply to the existence of an ecosystem, of the life of a species, a population, values that may be linked, for example, to emotions, to wonder, empathy, to the beliefs and the sacredness of nature in itself. So now the question is, what exactly do we need to preserve? Because you soon realize that preserving nature is a pretty vague concept. Should we preserve a particular species? Should we put a particular ecosystem under glass? And if I reduce my pressure by X%, is that enough? To answer this correctly, it's really important to define what we want to achieve. Are we trying to preserve functions and services, or are we trying to preserve nature for its existence value? What could be the minimum desirable for humanity that allows us to live decently with an acceptable level of well-being? So to achieve this, we need to look for functional ecosystems. because only functional ecosystems are capable of providing a wide ranges of services, and that's very important. Functional ecosystems, but also resilient ecosystems capable of maintaining their functionality despite the occurrence of shocks and disturbances, and there will be a lot. So the terms that is well defined and is well accepted scientifically and institutionally, and that capture this consideration of functionality and resilience is the good ecological status. This remains relatively conceptual still. So in practical terms, what can we do to ensure that our ecosystems are resilient, to guarantee good ecological status? These are two inseparable aspects to the ecological resilience of an ecosystem. First, the base, the biological diversity. So the more diverse it is, the more resilient it is. And then how to respect ecological thresholds, ensuring that disturbances, particularly our disturbances, do not exceed the limits of what ecosystems are capable of withstanding. So, for example, this means respecting resource extraction threshold, which must not exceed regeneration threshold, capacity, with water, fish, and timber, or also assimilation thresholds, not exceeding what ecosystems are capable of degrading or absorbing. So for this point, companies should aim to achieve a good ecological status for the ecosystems with which they interact with. And to do so, it should base its action on the best scientific knowledge, in particular the respect of these ecological thresholds. It's an approach that may seem ambitious, but once again, it's the bare minimum for our societies now. And this is obviously not just the opinion of WWF, but the opinion shared by the vast majority of all experts and research on the topic. Many companies have already committed to biodiversity, but for a long time, the watchword has been continuous improvement, slow, in line with environment management, PDCA, etc. Very imprecise approaches in terms of their ecological effectiveness. It has enabled companies to take ownership of the issue, sometimes to take interesting action for biodiversity. But today, given the catastrophic situation facing ecosystems, we expect companies to take significant action that is equal to the challenge. We're far away from that. It can be some in the formula from doing better to doing enough, that was published by the WRI like almost 10 years ago. And at WWF, we say now from doing better to doing what nature needs. So the third question for me today is that how do we go about it? And there's some good news. The efforts made in the recent years by many actors have paid off. We're fortunate to have the right framework to ensure the viability of the biosphere. We're not naive, and we didn't say that the game was won. There's still a lot to be done. Almost everything remains to be done. But at least we are collectively aware of what is at stake. We collectively know what needs to be done, and above all, we have the right instruments and the right tools. So in short, we have a global framework to set the ambition, institutional reporting framework to structure communication on the main components of corporate responsibility, methodological framework using the most advanced tools and science, and advanced companies that could show the way. So for the first one, the global biodiversity framework defined at COP15, I won't stay long on that, I won't go back over it. It set the objective of halt and reverse nature loss by 2050. So it also asked governments to define robust reporting frameworks for the private sector. So that's at the global level. Then the new European framework reporting, this is what we just did, with CSRD to come in 2025. So this is not perfect, but at least that's the best framework that we have globally, collectively, at the planet level. So this one is interesting these are three components, really elements for WWF. The quantitative measurements of impact of nature on nature, the setting of targets for nature, and the alignment of these objectives with science and ecological thresholds, and the construction of transition plan. So there are many other things inside of that, but these three global quantitative measurements, setting of targets, and construction of transition plan are the most effective and important to be able to act in favor of biodiversity. So that's a good point. And this will be particularly scrutinized by stakeholders in disclosure, so I hope this will work. And then today, companies no longer have any excuses for not responding appropriately. Oh, sorry, I'm still a bit rehearsing that. So today, companies no longer have any excuses for not responding appropriately to these elements. If for a long time there was a wait-and-see attitude to approaches, doubt about the tools, hesitation about the level of ambition, today private sector has a favorable context in which to meet all these expectations, the framework, the tools, and scientific knowledge. So I'm thinking about the Science-Based Target Network framework developed since 2018 by more than 30 experts, organizations in conjunction with companies, and which provide extremely solid answers to the question of measuring impact on nature, the question of target, and the question of action plan. Some of the trends are that it draws on the best existing tools, specializing in certain ecosystem components to assess the impact and the stage of nature. So some of you might know the Water is Filter, the Global Forest Watch, or also Globio used by the CDC Biodiversité, which will be in the panel. It's also based on the best scientific knowledge, the planet boundaries that you've heard about, also the work of the IPCC, the GBF, and the wealth of information on the good ecological status of ecosystem that exist at local level. Thirdly, it's complementary with other references, such as the TNFD, and everything now is almost available. So companies could take action clearly now, thanks to all this. And I'd like to finish with the pioneers, because this is not just a pitch and a speech. There's also lots of evidence. We work with companies because they are very important in our theory of change. The whole vision that we've just developed, with its conceptual, methodological, and institutional dimension, would be totally incomplete without the practical work that we've been carrying out with our partner this year. So Carrefour, Bell, Hermès, Alpro, Sodexo, and Michelin have all agreed to put their trust in us, sometimes since 2020, to test SBTN, sometimes on prototype version, taking risk to ensure that SBTN is as operational as possible. These efforts have paid off with publication in 23 of the first version of the guidance for water and terrestrial ecosystem. SBTN has also selected in 2023 a group of 17 companies that were sufficiently advanced in the method to test the first target setting mechanism. Among them, we are proud to have three partners who have been involved for a long time: Carrefour, Bell, and Alpro. And then there is Kering, which will be in the panel just afterwards. This is the vision that we actively promote for 6 years in WWF, and to be precise, that the Capital Natural team, which I represent today, is developing. I know that there is 3 reports that are going to be launched in 24 on the setting of the target with CSRD, on the construction of the nature transition plans also, and publishing also a report with feedbacks from several companies on the tool. We'll organize a meeting in autumn, and we hope that most of you will be part of this with the partners. So thank you very much for this moment. I just want to say a word in French. Nous sommes une ONG globale, nous agissons mondialement, localement. Nous avons besoin des efforts de tous pour construire le monde de demain. Je travaille à la philanthropie. Vos dons vont à des projets concrets. Nous développons énormément de projets sur le terrain. Je pense aussi à la sensibilisation que nous faisons notamment en ce moment sur la sauvegarde du plan national sur le loup et sur la dégradation des espèces comme le loup en termes de conservation. Je vous invite à signer ces pétitions et à soutenir le WWF et toutes les ONG et les associations présentes à ChangeNOW. Je vous remercie. Bonne journée.
Well done, man. Wow. Okay, we'll all go out together, okay? Wait. Great food for thought there. So thank you very much indeed, Thomas. And our brilliant panel, we'll sit down, we'll fill our water, we'll get comfortable, and then start our chat. I'll tell you what, let me just help you out here. There we go. So I have learned that it gets pretty hot on this stage, so I'm just going to set us all up here so we can have a good conversation. There you go. Thank you so much. And one, so I'll leave that there just in case you need to refill. And I'll do this one for you, Sophie, and for me. There we go. Right, speed pouring.
You're such a good moderator, and let me tell you, you only found out last night that you are moderating this part of the conference.
I did.
Thanks for doing the job.
And I'm delighted to be with such esteemed and eminent thinkers and doers. And I apologize, I just called you Sophie, didn't I? But in fact, you're Stefanie Hauer.
Yes.
Right. So
say it again, come on.
Stefanie Hauer.
Oh, that sounds great.
Is that right?
Yeah. What's the name of the company?
NatureRe.
Whoa!
Because
Some applause, please. He only learned that last night that he's moderating.
Because you told me that when I said it was NatureRe, thinking that I could be continental, you were like, no. Anyway, the point being, Stefanie does amazing work advising companies on this topic, on how they can get better at not destroying the planet. Okay, is that a good way of describing it?
Yes, it's a start.
It's a start. We're going to get into it in more depth. Arthur Campredon, did I pronounce that correctly?
Perfectly. Thank you so much.
Footprint Measurement Director at CDC Bio, formerly at the French Treasury. So you've seen this game on many sides. And when we talk about footprint measurement, that's about really digging into the detail of the impact that a business has on the environment. And of course, many of you will know Géraldine Vallejo, who is the sustainability lead at Kering. You'll know Kering, those very nice handbags and the rest of it. But formerly an engineer. So again, we have a huge amount of expertise here. But before we get into the conversation, I just wanted to reflect on a couple of things that our Benjamin, our keynote, gave us. We have moved a hell of a long way when it comes to measuring biodiversity. And I'm quoting directly from what he told us. Once upon a time, it was a vague concept. Now we have frameworks, science-based targets. There are no excuses. There is no more wait and see, because we've got solid answers. We know how to do this. So that's the kind of hard fact bit. But I do want to inject, nothing changes unless people are involved and people commit. And I want to talk a bit about that, motivations and how we got here. And I want to start with you, Géraldine, if you don't mind. Why does biodiversity matter to you? And was there a tipping point for you?
So why does it matter for Kering and for luxury fashion in general? So nature and biodiversity is crucial both for creativity and materials, because nature is an infinite source of inspiration for creative teams, and at the same time, the collection of our brands are mostly done with natural materials such as cotton, wool, cashmere, leather. And with the first effect of climate change and also the degradation of soil, biodiversity loss, we see the impact on the availability and the quality of the raw material that we need for our collection. Mm-hmm. So keeping nature in good health makes good business sense. investing in nature means investing in the resiliency of our supply chains. So that's so protecting and regenerating nature. That's not only the right thing to do, ethical thing to do. It's also from a pure business perspective in the long term. And so, to your question, was there a tipping point? So I think we are lucky enough to have a chairman and CEO, François Ripineau, who asked the question back in 2011, actually, of what are all these services that Benjamin talked about, the ecosystem services, that are not taken into account in the economical model, because we thought that they were infinite, but now that we see that they are finite, what if business had to take it into account? What would it be? And this is how we pioneered the environmental profit and loss account, which was a tool for natural capital accounting. It was a way to introduce nature within the P&L, within the profit and loss account. That was an important moment, but the tipping point, I think, was 2020 with COP15, with the discussion about the global framework. It was supposed to be the year of COP15, but it was the year of understanding that there is a close link between the health of the planet and the health of people and the health of business. And so these two combined led us to take stronger commitment and stronger action on biodiversity.
Stefanie, was the tipping point for you the same thing? Or was it different?
Well, with our company NatureRe Capital, we are restoring land in Colombia. And when I first got there, I saw the depleted land there that's depleted from cattle farming. Cattle farming, I heard that 1,000 times before that, but when I saw it, it is heartbreaking, because that's when I finally understood. There was one cow that sooner or later gets slaughtered, but in order to keep that cow, you're killing all the animals, all the plants of 1 hectare of land. So that's when I realized we're making a huge mistake. We only see the detail. We never see the big picture. The big picture, in this case, it's the country with the richest biodiversity. It's not just the cow that we're talking about. It is billions and billions of animals, big and small, that we kill before we can kill that cow.
So that cow is kind of like the metaphor for the wider story.
Well, metaphor is underestimating that huge damage that we're causing. So we're not really, not truly, not in our heart, not in our mind, asking ourselves, where does the stuff come from and where does the stuff go? And if we say, I throw it away, it's never gone. That's not true. It's just a false belief. You know, it's still there. If there are 300,000 different chemicals that are entering, that we make enter land and oceans, they are still there, continue killing animals and plants. And every time one of those species gets extinct, just in an area, this can be the tipping point of the entire ecosystem. So that was the moment when we realized we're completely underestimating the interdependencies and the huge damage that we're causing.
Arthur, was there a cow for you on your journey from, you started with governance and regulation, now you're providing solutions. What was your cow?
Well, it was not really a cow. It was more like papers and surveys
and spreadsheets.
And spreadsheets, exactly. So, well, my tipping point was quite long, actually, because you can tell I grew up surrounded by mountains, blah, 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 etc., etc. And I started working on sustainable finance at the French Treasury, so Ministry of Finance. I started with climate, saying, okay, we have to put in place regulation, incentive to incentivize and enable like all the companies, financial institutions, to basically go towards the agreement of COP21, so COP21 climate. And I was like, okay, we set up things, so that's great, we're going there. But when we come to figures on climate and the trajectories that we design, we were not there yet at all, even with the figures, and even though COP21 was like 7, 8 years old. And then I heard about biodiversity and how much of a crisis it is, even bigger than climate. And I was like, oh, wow. And it touches me because I'm close to nature, etc., etc. And I was like, we are late. The crisis is even worse than the climate one. And I was like, okay, we have to do something. And I want to basically use the skills and the knowledge that I got on the knowledge of the finance sector to try to basically make them move, make business move, because I really believe that it's a condition of success. We cannot just do it by ourselves at the government, now in the private sector. It's going to be the whole society. And the whole society is basically based on companies and financial institutions. And they have to basically get there. So in the end, when CDC Biodiversité reached out to me saying, okay, do you want to work on this? I was like, yeah, of course, because we designed at CDC Biodiversité a footprinting tool, so exactly what we are talking about today, to basically assess the impacts and dependencies for all companies and financial institutions. So it's the first step, just assessing where you are. And then comes the real game. You have to align, etc., etc. So I wanted to work on that and then basically make things move as fast as possible.
So I do want to dig in a little bit more to what the footprinting tool does, because that's one of many solutions, and I'm sure everybody here has been blown away by all the different ideas that are doing the rounds here at ChangeNOW. But this is about making it happen. Making business make that change. Géraldine, you lead on sustainability for an organization in an industry, for an organization where people are very willing to pay a premium for whatever it is, for luxury or for the emotional knowledge that they're doing good. Tell us about the kinds of things that you are doing, and if you can, any thoughts you have on how that might propagate, be spread to the other parts of the clothing and apparel industry, which I recognize is very complicated.
Okay, so yeah, that's true. People in luxury, people are ready to pay a premium, but that it means that there is an expectation that the product is perfect all along the way, including on the impact on the environment and on people. So we have to be up to this expectation. So how did we make that happen? So first, having this EPNL tool, so environmental profit and loss account, enables us to have this deep understanding on the interactions between nature and the business that Stefanie, you mentioned that, and also to translate that for the people at Kering at the different business units. So because the EPNL uses the same language as finance, it was a way to engage the finance people, very important in the corporate world. And then we would translate that operationally. What does it mean for the sourcing of material, for operations day to day? So that's one thing. And then we set up an ambitious strategy to have a net positive impact on nature by protecting and regenerating an area that is 6 times the total area that is needed for our business. So protecting 1 million hectares of irreplaceable ecosystems, because we need to protect this jewel. This is needed for the resiliency of the world. And 1 million hectares of regenerating lands in the supply chain. And for that, we created tools and action I won't develop here. But what is important is that we engage with other companies to do that. So for instance, we created the Regenerative Fund for Nature to scale up regenerative materials and achieve this 1 million hectares of regenerative. We reached to other companies. We were joined by Inditex, the mother company of Zara, who believes in that and joined us on that journey. Same for protecting. We created with Mirova, and we are joined by L'Occitane, so in the cosmetic sector, to create this protection and invest in natural climate solutions.
And Stefanie, obviously you advise, help organizations in all different kind of walks of life. How do you help them? What's your guidance? How do you help them make these kinds of collaborations?
Well, let me give you one example. What we do with NatureRe, we are bringing together the finance industry and the corporate off-takers. And there are Kering is really a leading company here, I must say, but more and more companies are understanding that they are not only responsible for reducing the harm, but at the same time learning how to have a positive impact. And I can only, say 1,000 times a day, it's not about getting less bad. It's just not.
1001.
Yeah. It's about trying to be really good for this world, nature positive. And so we asked ourselves, how can we do that? And we are restoring nature at scale. So if you look at the planet, you want to start in Colombia. That's the country where you have the most intense biodiversity and the fastest growth rate of trees. And as I said, we have a lot of depleted land there, and we do not plant trees at scale, but we enable nature to restore the ecosystems itself. So it's a nudging, that's all. And from that day on, nature does what nature does best. And we turn that into a financial model so that our partners can actually make money on being nature positive. And that is a very rewarding thing to do. So my job is actually to instill the fantasy that it's not just about reduction, but about creating something new and undoing the harm that we're causing. And that should be everybody's responsibility.
And into that space fit things like the footprint tool. Tell us about your plans with it, because you want to take it open source, is that right?
Yeah, it's correct, and it's going to be pretty soon. So indeed, we developed for like 8 years what Biodiversity needed, meaning a Biodiversity footprinting tool. We are able to, based on the same model as the carbon footprint, based on data, which is like financial data towards like inventory, so all kind of data, measure your impact, your dependencies to nature, all along your value chain. And this is the key start. I mean, understanding where exactly your hotspot of impact, risk, dependency are all along your value chain is not something that you know, actually. You just know it. It's not possible. You have to understand that all the models, all the economic activities rely on another one that have impact on nature. And you have to measure where the most impacts are so you can basically develop strategies, policies to address them. So it's going to be very key. And if we want to move forward, we basically, and coming back to what we need today, is that we need to speak the same language. I mean, biodiversity, economic world, it's two very, very different things. It's not the same principle, it's not the same language, etc., etc. But we have some ways to reconcile the two. I mean, speaking about risks, for example, we facing risk, right? You're a company, you are facing risks. How do I address them? I address them over the short term, the medium term, the long term, depending on the type of risk. Nature is a risk for the company. You have the transition risk for impacts and the dependencies. You have the, for example, physical risks. With you address the two. You have make a link between what the company can do and starting with measuring with the footprint, and then in the end, making the link with the biodiversity crisis. So it's very, very key. And the tool, I mean, the what we call the global biodiversity score, is going to be open source, so each and everyone pretty soon on the 11th of April can be using this tool. So it's very a big news for us because we spent like 8 years, developed a lot, thinking about how to measure each and every pressure on biodiversity and how to affect all the impacts to what pressure exactly. So it's a very long process, so very happy to open it up to everybody.
Stefanie, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I really need to make the point. Thanks for doing all the work, and it helps organizations to prioritize, where to start. But it should never be an excuse. Like, as long as we don't have that Excel sheet, as long as we don't understand everything, you will never be able to understand nature. It's way too complex. So it is not a data revolution. That is just a support. It is not a tech revolution. It is not an organizational revolution that we're aiming at. It's a cultural revolution. Yeah, that is the bottom line. And we have to ask ourselves, we're sitting here actually, that's nothing new what we're saying. We have known that forever, that we're killing those species, that we make them go extinct, that the harm is so big. But why have we looked the other way? Why have we told ourselves it's not that bad? When it is as bad as it gets. So I love
Because
everything
sometimes
that.
it's too difficult. Sometimes people look away because they can't face
Yeah, but
the perception of the scale of the task.
you know, is it ambitious to want to survive? I mean,
Well,
that's
one might argue it's essential. Geraldine, leadership, this is another way of saying we cannot wait for perfect.
Yes. Yes, and leadership addresses also your question on what are the solutions and who do we collaborate with on that. And I think it's all the more important for topics on biodiversity, working with NGOs, with experts coming from different fields. So our cotton comes from around the world, so does leather, etc. We work with associations on the ground, with indigenous people who have the solution. Just have to go up the supply chain, so that goes up to here. So that's one thing in leadership. Another thing is to be innovative on financing mechanism and be ready to invest in the long term, because nature takes time, season after season. And that's what we did with the Climate Fund for Nature. It's a patient 15-year investment, which is not usual for our economical world today. Non-speculative, but you need to create this new financing tool to invest in nature.
Let me take your word, creativity.
Yes.
That is the most important word here, because it's such a positive word, and it should inspire us every day that this is the most challenging leadership task we have, and that we can redesign the entire economy, and that we have to do that. So we have to go fully circular. We're talking about biodiversity, and my answer to that is, if you're not fully circular, you're not allowed to scale anymore, because you will continue to cause damage, maybe less than you would have. Yeah, but still, go circular, go fully circular. Stop extracting the resources and start managing them. That's what I like about the word management, that you manage resources, And this is, let me, with a positive note, it's our privilege as leaders. I always say the world now needs two things more than anything else. It's leaders and trees. And this is our time to shine, so please be creative.
So just a response to that, going fully circular, I'm pretty sure everybody here understands and would agree with that. Arta, you've been on the governance side, on the regulatory. Is this even possible without regulation?
Without regulation?
In mandating full circularity. I mean, well, can we do this unless we're told to do it?
I'm not sure. But what we can do is just set up regulation so that we are obliged to do it. And then it's a way to basically force everybody to do it. But it is possible, it is doable. It's within the policy makers' tools that you can do, actually.
Yeah.
We have no chance. I mean, we have to go fully circular. What would be the alternative?
Yeah.
Because if we're only less bad, if we're continuing the linear economy, we're only postponing the tipping points. And I don't want to tell my kids, I negotiated another 2 or 3 extra months for you of good life.
Yeah, thanks very much.
You have kids too, right?
I do, yes, I do, and I'm sure there's a lot of parents and uncles and aunties in here too. We started with tipping points, we kind of ended with tipping points. You've got about 40 seconds each for a conclusion. Géraldine, a call to action.
So my call to action would be that I know we're all working on what are the right KPIs to take the right decision, but my advice is take action without having all the KPIs and all the measurement, and use good sense and use the knowledge on the ground to go in that direction.
Arta?
Well, my message will be, please start aligning. We talk a lot about, where do we are, what are main impacts, bad dependencies, etc. the same way. You have some information, whether it's complete or not, start to align with the global biodiversity framework, which is the targets in 2050 where we should be in 2050. So aligning, meaning step by step, year after year, I change my business model. And I change and I make courageous and brave decisions each and every day so that my business model start slowly and slowly be aligning with the whole global objectives. And without this, well, we won't align, so we won't respect our objective, we won't respect our commitment, because we took the commitment to respect it, each and every one of us, because we have government that signed it. So now, just we need action, and we need to start to align, and basically that's why
we have the information, we have the models.
We have everything that we need.
Stefanie.
And take responsibility for the entire supply chain, upstream and downstream, and understand that this is not just the leadership for one company, that it's systems leadership, and that's a wonderful thing to learn. So go fully circular, make no compromises here. We don't have the time. We're running out of resources and time in the same moment. And feel responsible for restoration of nature. That should be everybody's job now, not the job of a couple of biologists. And act like your life depends on it, because it does.
And just a comment
10 seconds.
On what you said, because it's very important that everybody knows that there is a difference between the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. The objective in 2050 for climate is to reduce the increase of temperature, so it's a reduction of impact. For biodiversity, it's different. We have to go positive at some point. So we have to limit our impact to zero, and then restore biodiversity. So if we want to commit and to align with our objective, we need to get there, and we need positive impacts, and we need solutions on the ground so that we restore and renature all our biodiversity and nature.
The solutions are here, our brilliant panel. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
It's not over. It's not over. Sit down. Where are you going? Thank you very much indeed, panel. So, next we have a brilliant thinker with a fantastic backstory as well. She also advises organizations and companies and industries on how they can better understand their relationship with the environment, how they can reduce the impact that their work has on habitats, on biodiversity. I'm delighted to have with me for another 20 minutes, Juliette Pugliesi, who is the nature manager at BSR. Hello. How you doing?
Good, and you?
Grab a seat. Right, okay, I'm going to switch that one out. Bring that one in. That's empty. There you go, and I'll let you kind of fill your own one up.
Yeah, I'm going to fill it.
How you doing? You were listening in on our chat?
Yeah, a bit.
These are conversations, no doubt, that you have at length a lot of the time with your clients, with your network, with your colleagues.
Yes.
Take me back to your story and how you got involved in this world.
Well, I actually grew up in the countryside, in a very small French village, not that far from here, actually,
okay,
but surrounded by oak forest and rivers. So I was really surrounded by nature, and I was really impressed by nature when I was a child. I could spend hours looking at the river, the plants, trying to find animals and stuff like that.
I'm there.
You're there. You're in the river.
Yeah.
So yeah, I remember I feel deeply passionate about nature. I remember also being in the local newspaper, for example, when I was 10 years old, because I was able to recognize a specific type of owl, a bird.
As in a tweet.
Yeah. So yeah, I was really passionate about nature, and my favorite cartoon were basically wildlife documentaries.
Yeah.
Maybe too much. I maybe watched too much wildlife documentaries. This is why
I don't think you can watch too many wildlife documentaries. I don't think that. Yeah.
So I actually went to Kenya in a wildlife conservancy to protect and take care about the giraffe.
The very tall,
tall
giraffe,
one.
Yeah.
And there is actually 9 species of giraffe. I don't know if you know that, but the one I was looking for and protecting was the Rothschild giraffe. They're well known because they have the legs are white, so it's like white socks, basically. And my tipping point was basically I realized that we do have a toy when we were young, which is called Sophie the giraffe. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that.
Here in France.
Here in
The
France.
little
Rubber.
Is it the squeaky one?
Yeah, the squeaky one.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I'm maybe older. You have, I don't know, baby dolls or other kind of plastic toy.
I'm sure there is an equivalent in every country. Will have its own Sophie the giraffe.
And I realized that there is more Sophie the giraffe in the world than actual giraffe.
Okay.
So it was actually my tipping point, and I was thinking like we need to take care about biodiversity. We need to make sure that it actually exists for, the future in the long term. So this is why I actually started to work on helping businesses to assess their risk and their impacts on biodiversity. Because obviously we are the main cause of biodiversity loss, us as human beings, and we're not here today at ChangeNOW to play the blame game. We're here to find solutions. So this is why I actually started to work with companies on biodiversity topics.
And so let's just dig into that work a little bit. A lot of the conversation has historically been about measurement, and I don't really, unless you want to dig into the measurement, but we had such a kind of clear overview of that from Benjamin. But just where do you think we are now in terms of the challenge?
Yeah, that's a good question, and this is almost the question I had every day from our corporate member. What are the different metrics I could use on biodiversity? Where should I start as a company?
Yeah.
I would say there is maybe two things that to know about biodiversity and the specificity of biodiversity. The first thing is like we need to stop dreaming about having one single metric that will encompass all the biodiversity aspects. This would be obviously a set of metrics rather than one single metric. And the second is like we need to look at the local level, and at some points we need to go at the landscape level, because if I take the example of a giraffe, there is no giraffe here because biodiversity is so locally specific that we need to go on the ground. And on the different metrics that the company can use, I would say, I rely on science, and there is IPBES, which is the equivalent of IPCC, but for biodiversity, the group of experts that are actually publishing reports on the state of nature. They're saying that there is 5 main pressure that we have on biodiversity, or driver of natural loss, basically. And for each of those 5 pressure, there is actually KPI for companies. So the first one is land use change. I'm sure like all of us are aware about deforestation. We discussed that earlier. So the equivalent is like the meter square of land or area converted. The second one is climate change, and companies are super mature on climate change right now. So they do have GHG emission, which is a KPI we should take into account for this one. The third one is overexploitation of species. I think for this one of the main examples might be fisheries, because all of us know that we have an overexploitation of fish stock. But there is also, for example, water. Water could be a resource that is overexploited. So basically taking into account meters cube of water use, or gallon if you're in the US.
Yeah.
And the fourth one is pollution. So basically there is, you could have pollution. This one is kind of a tricky one because you could have pollution in the air, you could have pollution in land and in water, in ocean. I would recommend starting with fresh water and soil, because those are the easiest to track, but it also depends on the industry you're working with.
Yeah.
And the last one is invasive species. And this is my favorite one, because no one's talked about this one.
Yeah.
But this is basically when a species is not supposed to be in this ecosystem, they're starting to grow and to threaten other endemic species.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in some ways, it's obvious if you run an organization or if you are in an industry that has a direct relationship with nature, they can come to you and you can help them through understanding that process. But there'll be lots of businesses here that are services, and that are several steps removed from a direct, you work in an office, obviously you compute in the cloud and the rest of it. What are the things that organizations like that need to think about, and how do you help them understand their relationship with nature?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we're also working a lot with tech companies as well. So obviously the link is not as direct, for example, as a food and ag company or as Kering, who is actually directly involved with raw materials.
Or as you say, fisheries and forests.
Yeah, but this framework is actually applicable to all different kind of companies. The only thing is like you will need maybe to go upper in your value chain, obviously. So I would say, yeah.
So look at where we've been and where we are, in terms of where we're going to.
Yeah.
What are your goals and what are your hopes?
What? Sorry.
What are your goals?
Yeah, my goals.
What are your hopes?
Yeah. So my goal is actually working more. So obviously, as a company, you need to work on the assessment, which is a starting point. Then you need to develop ambitious strategies and ambitious roadmaps. So I would say I would love to work more on that kind of project, obviously. I recently read that there is only, among the 350 leading companies, there is only 6% that actually have time-bound goal related to deforestation. Only 6%, which is like nothing.
Yeah.
So I would encourage everyone just to start setting targets and commitment about the KPI I mentioned previously. And my hopes actually for the future is actually like that I have more, I have a different hopes. I hope that the new CSRD that is actually coming will help companies to understand their materiality impacts on nature. So I think there is upcoming regulation that will be forcing companies to address those issues. So I'm very glad that they are happening.
So regulation has to be part of it.
Yeah, sure. And the second is like I'm also an associate professor in university, and I do see that there is lots of like youth and just people that are really keen to change things, and just like I really trust them.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because so often this discussion about what the future business will look like is driven by a younger generation of entrepreneurs who have a different understanding of where we're at. In your relationship as a teacher with this new generation of thinkers and doers, what do you see happening there? What's exciting you about what they're coming up with?
They are very curious about practical solutions. They are pretty much aware about the state of nature, nature laws. They're really keen to learn more about what are the different tools we could use. So most of the thing I'm happy to share is basically the existing tool, the different approach that we could have to tackle and to avoid and reduce your impacts on nature, I would say, yeah.
So this is a room, a conference full of not just thinkers, but people who are doing things. What's your call to action? What do you want people to do?
My call to action is like, I think every company could act. As we were saying, it's not because you belong to the tech sector that you need to not taking care about nature and biodiversity. I would recommend to have this nice thing, which is ACT. The first one is like assessing your impacts on nature. Second one is to commit. We need to have more commitment. There is still a lot of progress on that. And the last one is transformation. And I think transformation will happen with good roadmaps, good KPI, but also a good governance. And I think it's key. We mentioned a lot data in the previous roundtable. Of course, data is a point, but I would like to imagine like if, for example, if we have all the data that we want, if we are able to assess all the impact that we have on nature and biodiversity, the perfect data, let's imagine in a perfect world, will it really change the way companies behave in the daily life?
Will it?
I'm not sure.
What will?
I think having the right governance, defining the role and responsibility inside the company. I really trust as well the fact that maybe boards should be trained a bit on sustainability issues. The leadership needs to be more aware about those issues in sustainability and biodiversity. And I also think that maybe compensation will help a bit. There is a very good example of how compensation and actually having some KPIs related to biodiversity into the compensation scheme of different people. It could be leadership, but also company, as individuals, would help.
So I'm really curious, I'm glad you mentioned the role of governance and board composition.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a wider conversation about B Corps and CICs and the rest of it. But we are seeing organizations doing some pretty innovative stuff, like putting nature on the board.
Yes.
Does that work?
Yes, it works. And I encourage all of you to look at the company whose name is Faith in Nature. They're based in the UK, and they have done this amazing and very innovative work just to put someone in the board that is actually representing nature interests at the board level. This is a rotative sit, I would say, so they're just changing from time to time, and actually brings more nature in the agenda. So they were very happy with this outcome. I understand that this is maybe innovative, but this is starting and this is coming, so I think we should look at it.
And when you have these kinds of discussions with organizations,
yes,
what are the practical steps that you need to go through to make something like that happen? Because it sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
But putting it, actually making it happen, that's a different thing, right?
Yeah, agree. I think it's starting by baby steps. So first, doing a session or a training to the board, just explaining what is nature, what is biodiversity, but not only about species, but how does it relate to business. I think it needs to be very tailored to it. And we do that at BSR. We have a specific team working with boards because it's a specific audience as well that needs to be trained on that. And then maybe you could start having those conversations about how nature interests are represented at the board level. But I think, yeah.
So I want to be back on this stage in a year's time having this conversation again with you. To all the leaders in this room,
yes,
all the people that have influence or responsibility at an SLT level or are on boards themselves, what do you want them to be able to say they have done this time next year in terms of elevating nature at a governance level in their organizations?
I think maybe it would be good as well. So far, CSR is still a department that's still very siloed.
Yeah.
So I would encourage maybe to spread it a bit, CSR. And we had the concept at BSR that we called systemic CSR, which is not really only focusing on the CSR department, but also looking at what the supply chain team is doing, the purchasing team, the legal team as well must be involved, the finance team. So I would recommend maybe to spread CSR across those organizations, maybe by actually everything is related to people. So if you change, for example, the job requirement of someone and adding a line related to CSR strategy, including the biodiversity strategy, maybe it's going to change a bit, I think.
A question that we went through with the panel prior to this, we cannot wait for perfect.
Exactly, yeah. I 100% agree with this one, yeah. We need to start now, and we need to assess impacts on nature and yeah, setting the commitment. Even if the data is not perfect, I think we should get started, yeah.
We're almost out of time. What's next for you?
What's next for me? That's a good question. I will pursue my journey. I mean, as soon as I would say that I wish we could have more real giraffe in the world. So I will keep to pursue my fight for that, and working with companies on nature topics.
Juliette, Pugliesi, thank you very much indeed for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. I learnt loads. I hope you guys did as well. Lots of food for thought. Can't wait for perfect. We've got the tools. We've got the frameworks. You guys all have influence. Use it. Thanks a lot.